Hi, everybody. So we are going to do another video lecture here on FRQs and how to write FRQs and what FRQs are. And then we're going to do some practice in class when I see you next. So FRQs are actually what you guys are going to be writing for me for most of your assessments until we get back to school. So let me just tell you a little bit about the AP HUG exam in May. So on May 4th, you guys are going to take your big end of year test where you can earn college credit if you do well. So it's high stakes, but I will get you ready, I promise. So let me just quickly go over what this test is, and then I'll talk more about FRQs. So the human geo test is made up of two parts. 50% of the test comes from multiple choice questions. There are 60 questions that you will have 60 minutes to answer. It used to be that it was like 75 questions for 60 minutes, but they changed it because they added like a ton of stimulus. A stimulus is just like a picture or a graph or a map or anything that requires you to look at something in order to answer the questions. And so College Board added a bunch more of those, and they take a little bit longer to answer. So they reduce the amount of questions that you have to answer in 60 minutes, but you always had 60 minutes. Your answer choices are A through E. Some of the questions are easy, just basic definition. This is a very, very small percentage of the questions. The vast majority are application of vocabulary, which is what we will continue to practice all year so you feel prepared. Some of the AP human geography questions, because College Board is evil, seem to have two right answers. The expectation is that you pick the best of the correct answers. And then there's stuff that you're going to see that we never covered in class. College Board does this on purpose. Like they write like really super hard questions sometimes because they're just trying to weed out, I don't know, they're just trying to create their 5, 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s, I suppose. But it's frustrating. We'll talk more about this later, but don't get mad at me because it's designed for you to be asked questions that I specifically have no idea you're going to be asked. So we'll talk more about that when we get closer, and especially before we take our first multiple choice test if we ever get back to school. But the other part of the test is free response questions, which is 50% of your test. You have 3 questions in 75 minutes, so you have 25 minutes per FRQ. And that's going to seem like not a lot of time. And if it seems like too much time, you're probably not doing it right. But we're going to practice this skill all year long, so I'm not too worried at this moment. So what is a free response question? In Human Geo, our tests is, like I just said, 2 parts. Free response questions ask you to briefly respond to multiple part questions. Now, here's why students like these questions, because it is not like a typical history or English class essay. There is no thesis. There is no there is use evidence to support your answer, but the evidence comes from your head or from the stimulus that's on the page. It is meant to be short answer rather than whole paragraph or essay. So that's kind of good. It's basically like if you know it, then you just answer it. So just to give you an idea, and this is standardized last year, except for when we had the coronavirus outbreak, everything changed. So actually, this is I still do not know what these actually are going to look like in practice, because this past year was like a really strange year. I'll tell you more about that when I see you in class. But in general, AP designed these 3 questions very intentionally. So question 1 will be a question without a stimulus. So it's just going to be words on a page. There's going to be no pictures, no data, no nothing. Question 2 is going to have 1 stimulus. Question 3 is going to have 2 stimuli. Generally, question 3 is going to be the most challenging because it's going to require that you apply the 2 images. Like you're going to have to use the 2 images together to draw conclusions. And all of the questions are intended to ask you to demonstrate your learning over multiple units. So it's not just going to be like, oh, this question's just on unit 1. In fact, there's never ever been a question, an FRQ over unit 1 before. So I don't anticipate that there will be one this year either, but unit 1 concepts could be asked within the FRQ question. I wish this thing would go away because this part's like kind of important. So let me see if I can make it go away. Yeah, everything just went crazy. Okay, so Okay, I'll just leave it there like that. So at least 2 of the questions are going to assess your ability to analyze across geographic scales. So that last learning target, well, second to last learning target that we talked about, your ability to answer questions based on scale is going to be really important. It's a really important skill, and you're going to have to demonstrate it on the FRQs. The other thing that is common is that you're going to have to be really conscientious about the question in terms of at what scale they're looking for you to answer. So if it's like a question about global, like it's global in scale, and you answer it based on like country by country, you're not going to earn points. But again, we'll go through this in more detail when we get closer to the actual test. So we'll do some more boot campy kind of stuff with FRQs. This is just an overview. How's it graded? So every question is going to have 7 parts, and each question is going to be worth 7 points. Typically, it's going to be anywhere between 5 to 7 letters of questions that you're going to be asked. And you're just going to earn points by applying the information you know to what the question is answering and then asking you. And then in May, the tests are scored by people like me. So I'm actually an AP reader. Typically we go to Cincinnati to grade these, but like this year it was distributed. So I was home sitting exactly where I am, scoring all the essays from last year. So I'm like really knowledgeable when it comes to FRQs. And so I'm going to help you, and you're going to get better at this. So don't expect to do it perfectly the first time, even the second time, but we do a ton of work with FRQs. So I promise that you will have confidence when you get to the actual test. I swear on this. Okay, this is an important slide as well. And hopefully if I make it big, it will like look like it's supposed to look. So the FRQs are going to have task verbs, and the task verbs are just going to be one of these 5. So you're going to be asked to compare, define, describe, explain, and identify. Those are the only task verbs that you have to worry about. But each one of the verbs has a different expectation in terms of what you have to do to demonstrate your learning. So compare is a description of the similarities and or differences. So this is a longer explanation. You can't answer this with just one sentence. And the thing that you have to remember about compare, like you have to remember, is that you have to compare both things. So you have to use so for example, if I'm saying absolute, like compare absolute and relative location, you must say absolute location is this, whereas relative location is this. You have to speak to both concepts. Even if it seems like you're being redundant, like Avi, it's going to be the opposite of what you just said. Say it anyway. You have to, or you're not going to get points. Define is pretty basic. It can be a sentence or two. You're just providing the meaning of a word. Describe is a little bit longer than just a define because you're providing the relevant characteristics of a specific topic. So you want to kind of talk about what you know to be true about that concept or topic. Explain is, okay, so explain kind of comes in 2 parts. First, you're providing information about how or why a relationship, process, pattern, position, or outcome occurs using evidence and or reasoning. And again, the evidence doesn't come from like some long narrative piece of research that you have to find, but usually it's going to come from the stimulus or it's just going to come from your knowledge. So it should be a longer explanation. And if you answer it with just one sentence, you have not done what you're supposed to do. Now, probably the most challenging of the task verbs is explain the degree. So this is a little bit like a compare, but you're being asked to consider how true or accurate a concept is in terms of its relevancy to a real world situation, and I should say, how limited this concept is when being applied to a real world situation. So you might say to a certain degree, this thing is true, but it's also not true, and here's why, and that's a basic way of kind of thinking about it, but you have to talk about the degree. So you have to talk about both, again, kind of like a compare. And then identify is just information about a specific topic without elaboration or explanation. So it's pretty simple, like a define. Just a sentence or two is all you really need. Now, notice how I'm emphasizing the length because you should get in the habit of thinking about length when you are given any one of these task verbs. So to make sure that you understand this, I want you to pause the video and I want you to, and I'm going to add, this is the first question I'm going to ask you when I see you next. So I'm going to have you put the verbs they're in alphabetical order now, but I want you to organize them based on least involved, the easiest of the task verbs versus the most complex. And then I want you to be able to justify your answer. So make sure you have that knowledge with you when I see you next. So do that. Okay, now how to be a successful writer of an FRQ. There are some tips and tricks that you have to think about in a way that's going to sort of challenge the traditional way of writing essays in your mind. But trust me, this is the way to do it. And having scored hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of student essays, and I'm not joking about that, I've learned some tricks along the way that I want to share with you. So first things first, these are going to be organized and you'll see the practice. It's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way down, right? So it's 7 parts potentially, no longer than 7. It could be less than 7, but you're always going to answer each part individually. You're going to actually put letter A, answer the prompt, leave some space in between the letters. So like A and B, you'll leave like a space in between. Now, it's so hard, you guys, to predict whether or not we're gonna, I don't know how you're taking this test. Right now, College Board says that they're gonna bring everybody together and you're gonna do it on paper like it always has been done. But if this virus is still raging, they might turn it into an online test. I don't know. But regardless of whether or not you're typing or you're handwriting, always leave space between each one of the parts of the prompt. You want to address scale of the question, right? So like 2 of the 3 are going to ask you in some way to consider scale. So find out like if it's online, you won't be able to look ahead, but if it's paper and pencil, you'll have all 3 questions. So you can actually like decide which one is the hardest one, answer that one first, and then save your like easiest one for later. But regardless, when you look at the question, you want to think, okay, how is scale being asked? Like in what way am I being asked to consider scale in this particular question? And then always address just that level. And remember, scale of inquiry is different than scale of analysis. When I'm saying scale here, I mean scale of inquiry, not analysis, okay? Write incomplete sentences. Even if it's an identify question and you think you can get away with writing one word, don't. Just don't. Applying geographic terms in context. We've already been practicing this. When we did this with the simulation that we did, I had you write a paragraph using vocabulary words, and when you use them, you have to use them in such a way that makes the reader or your teacher know that you understand those terms. And so you want to make sure that you're kind of fluidly using the vocabulary. Number 6 is like an odd thing to say because usually like your teachers are like, elaborate on your ideas. Not here. You want to provide, like you want to answer the question, right? But you want to answer the question, but you don't want to overdo it. So if you're being asked to identify, just identify. Don't like go into like paragraphs worth of details. Remember, 1 to 2 sentences for an identify is all you need. Once you do it, move on to the next question or you'll run out of time. And then last but not least, this is like a really silly thing to say, but you really want to make sure that you're answering what the question says, not what you wish it were asking or some sort of like other related thing. And I have like literally scored essays before where kids didn't even like read the prompt and they missed such easy points because they weren't paying attention to the stimulus. So make sure you're actually answering what the question is saying, not what you think it might be saying. Okay. And then I think that's it, you guys. So if you have any questions, jot them down, and I'll start the next period off with just answering some questions, and then we're going to do 2 practice FRQs during our next synchronous session. Hey, bye, you guys.